In today's video, we're looking at the worst deaths in live TV history, from a meteorologist crushed by tornado debris while broadcasting live to a demolition expert struck down by flying rebar as millions watched the catastrophic collapse unfold. It was May 23, 2016, when 34-year-old Cameron Blake positioned his mobile broadcasting unit along a desolate stretch of highway outside Moore, Oklahoma. Cameron worked as a meteorologist for a regional news station, known for his fearless storm coverage and ability to make complex weather patterns understandable to viewers. His childhood experience surviving a tornado drove his obsession with understanding these violent storms. Beside him sat 28-year-old Peter Webb, his camera operator, who had voiced concerns about their proximity to the developing supercell. Peter was cautious by nature, but he trusted Cameron's experience and deferred to his judgment, even as the radar showed the storm intensifying at an alarming rate. The afternoon sky had turned an ominous shade of green-gray. Cameron had positioned their modified SUV facing east to capture the storm's approach, explaining the rotation patterns to viewers watching at home. Among those viewers was his wife Jennifer, 7 months pregnant with their first child. The tornado touched down approximately 1 mile southwest of their position, appearing as a dark wedge-shaped column. Cameron's voice remained steady as he narrated the touchdown for nearly 15 seconds, his professional instinct overriding everything else. The funnel moved northeast at 35 miles per hour, closing the distance rapidly. Debris began pelting the vehicle, branches, gravel, and roofing material creating violent hammering sounds. Peter shouted that they needed to leave immediately, but Cameron continued broadcasting. The tornado's outer circulation reached them, and the SUV began rocking violently as gusts likely pushed 120 to 130 miles per hour near the vehicle. Hail and small debris hammered the glass. A broken 2x4 stud, roughly 4 feet long, punched through the driver's side window at an estimated 100 to 120 miles per hour. The tempered glass exploded into pellets. The board fragmented on the window frame, and the leading segment struck Cameron's left temple, causing a depressed skull fracture with bone driven into the brain. A second shard of aluminum siding scissored through the windshield and tore across his right clavicle, likely lacerating the subclavian artery. Bright arterial bleeding pooled across the seat within seconds. Peter managed to accelerate away from the tornado's path, screaming Cameron's name. The mounted camera, streaked with blood and debris, continued recording, its distorted footage catching only fragments of what happened inside the vehicle. Cameron's breathing became irregular and gasping, indicating severe brain trauma and imminent death. Peter drove for approximately 2 minutes before pulling over, pressing his jacket against Cameron's shoulder wound. But the damage was catastrophic. Blood had soaked through Cameron's clothing and pooled on the floor. His face had turned pale gray, his lips blue. The irregular gasping breaths came further apart, then stopped entirely. Peter felt for a pulse but found nothing. The live feed continued transmitting until the station finally cut to the studio. The tornado had deposited debris across the main highway, blocking emergency routes. Responders reached the location nearly 20 minutes later and pronounced Cameron dead at the scene from massive head trauma and blood loss. The station faced immediate backlash for not cutting the feed sooner. Peter resigned 3 weeks later. 11 weeks after his death, Jennifer delivered their daughter, Sophia, at full term and filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the station. It was November 8, 2017, when 41-year-old Lydia Grant arrived at a local television studio in Toronto for what should have been a routine cooking segment. Lydia was a culinary instructor who had been teaching French cuisine for years and making occasional appearances on a small regional lifestyle program that aired weekday mornings to a modest local audience. She had never experienced a serious incident on set before. She was known for her warm personality and expertise in classic techniques requiring open flame preparation. That morning, she wore a flowing silk blend blouse in burgundy paired with her chef's apron and her signature pearl necklace, a gift from her late mother. The segment focused on preparing crêpes Suzette, a classic French dessert requiring tableside flambé with Grand Marnier liqueur. Producers had debated cutting the flambé portion due to safety concerns, but Lydia insisted it was her signature. The live segment began with Lydia preparing orange butter sauce in a copper pan. She added approximately 4 ounces of Grand Marnier to the hot pan and tilted it toward the gas flame to ignite the alcohol vapors. The alcohol ignited as expected, thin blue flames flickering across the sauce. Lydia reached for a serving plate while holding the flaming pan, turning slightly away from the camera. Her silk blend blouse sleeve, which had come unbuttoned at the cuff, draped forward and made contact with the flames. It ignited instantly, flames racing up her right sleeve from wrist to shoulder in approximately 2 seconds as the fabric fused and burned against her skin. Lydia gasped and dropped the copper pan, which spilled flaming liquid across the kitchen island. She instinctively began batting at the flames with her left hand, which caused the fire to spread to her left sleeve as well. Derek rushed toward her with a kitchen towel but hesitated, unsure how to help. Flames reached Lydia's hair, which had been styled with aerosol hairspray 90 minutes earlier. Her hair ignited in a sudden flash, flames spreading across her scalp and down to her face and neck. Her initial screams turned to choking, gasping sounds as the heat seared her airways and burned her facial skin. She stumbled backward and fell sideways onto the studio floor. Derek threw the towel over her upper body, but the towel itself caught fire from the intensity of the burning synthetic fabric. James grabbed a fire extinguisher but fumbled with the safety pin. By the time he deployed the extinguisher, Lydia had sustained 2nd and 3rd degree burns across approximately 38% of her body, including her face, scalp, neck, both arms, and upper chest. Lydia remained conscious, making hoarse sounds as she struggled to breathe. The burned skin on her face had begun sloughing off, and her airways were rapidly swelling from thermal injury. Paramedics arrived and recognized the severity of her airway burns. Her breathing had become labored and wheezing. They performed an emergency intubation in the studio to secure her airway before transport, while beginning fluid resuscitation. She was transported to the regional burn center in critical condition, with dropping blood pressure and signs of shock. Lydia Grant died that afternoon from complications of severe burn injuries, including respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. The network immediately suspended all cooking segments involving open flame. Derek required psychological counseling and took a 3-month leave. Though the station never released the footage, a short off-screen recording briefly circulated in local culinary circles online before being removed. It was September 22, 2019, when 47-year-old Dominic Hayes arrived at the Riverside Tower construction site in Portland, Oregon, to conduct a safety inspection for the city's building department. Dominic was a Canadian structural inspector contracted under an international peer review compliance agreement, with years of experience evaluating high-rise projects across North America. Known for his meticulous attention to detail, he was specifically requested to assess the tower's steel framework before the next phase of construction could proceed. The Riverside Tower was a 40-story mixed-use building that had reached the 28th floor when concerns arose about welding quality in the steel beam connections. Dominic had reviewed contractor reports showing some irregularities, but had been told by the construction foreman that all critical joints had been re-inspected and certified safe for his walkthrough. His colleague Sarah had questioned the timing of the inspection, but Dominic trusted the contractor's assurances. The inspection team included project manager Lisa Rodriguez, safety coordinator Jake Morrison, and a building department photographer. The assessment required Dominic to examine beam connections on the 28th floor while documenting any visible defects in the steel framework. The inspection began with Dominic positioned near the building's northeast corner, explaining proper welding techniques while moving systematically along the exposed steel beams. A sudden metallic shift rang through the steel frame. Not a clean ping, but the deep scraping sound of a connection slipping under load. At the time, the inspection team assumed it was just thermal movement in the beams, a common sound on unfinished floors, and no one recognized it as the onset of structural failure. Investigators later determined that the noise originated from a critical load-bearing joint, where substandard welding had left a hidden flaw. Once the connection slipped, the compromised weld fractured instantly under stress. Within moments, the failure spread to adjacent connections, causing a localized collapse limited to the northeast corner between the 28th and 26th floors. The drop halted when the load was redistributed across lateral bracing and intact crossbeams, preventing full progressive collapse of the tower. The floor began sagging toward the center. Dominic lost his footing as the steel decking buckled beneath him. A primary support beam twisted and separated from its connection, and the entire northeast section of the 28th floor gave way. The floor section dropped in a pancaking motion, with Dominic falling through the failing structure. He dropped approximately 15 feet through twisted steel and debris before his body struck a horizontal I-beam at roughly 20 miles per hour. The impact broke his right arm, several ribs, and caused internal bleeding, but he remained alert and tried to grab onto the beam as the collapse continued. The partial floor failure extended downward through 2 additional levels before stabilizing, sending debris and structural members cascading through the open framework. As his body fell through the dust and twisted steel, the site's documentation drone, hovering in a fixed survey position, only caught a brief, obscured glimpse of movement before losing visual in the debris cloud. Dominic's body struck a concrete foundation wall at ground level at an estimated 45 miles per hour. His descent had been partially slowed by secondary impacts and structural interference during the collapse, preventing a full free-fall acceleration. The impact dislocated his shoulder and fractured his collarbone, while his torso compressed against the wall, causing severe internal injuries, including a punctured lung and damaged spleen. He sustained catastrophic internal injuries and was likely killed on impact. The collapsed floor section crashed down seconds afterward, burying much of the area in twisted steel and concrete debris. The drone, still hovering in its fixed survey position, passively recorded the aftermath. In the wide-angle feed, Dominic's body could be seen partially visible among the wreckage. Emergency responders needed over an hour to safely navigate the unstable debris field. Dominic Hayes was pronounced dead at the scene, along with 3 construction workers. It was November 23, 2017, when 29-year-old Phoebe Larson arrived at the staging area for Philadelphia's annual Thanksgiving parade. Phoebe worked full-time as an event coordinator, but volunteered her expertise to the parade committee each year as a passion project. Known for her infectious enthusiasm and organizational skills, she had participated in the parade for 6 consecutive years and had been promoted to lead handler for one of the parade's largest character balloons. The balloon was a 52-foot-tall cartoon character, requiring a team of 24 handlers using guide ropes to control its movement. Weather conditions that morning included sustained winds of 22 miles per hour, with gusts up to 34 miles per hour, approaching the parade's safety threshold. Parade officials had debated canceling the balloon portion, but decided to proceed with enhanced safety protocols. Phoebe had attended an early morning safety briefing, where handlers were instructed to immediately release ropes if wind conditions became dangerous. Her position was as lead handler on the front left guide rope, responsible for coordinating the team's movements. Her parents, visiting from Minnesota, were watching from the bleachers approximately 1 mile into the parade route. As Phoebe's balloon team approached the intersection of Market Street and 16th Street, wind speed suddenly increased. The balloon, which had been floating at a stable 15-foot altitude, suddenly lifted to nearly 30 feet as a gust caught its broad surface area. Phoebe immediately radioed parade control to report the dangerous conditions. A second, stronger gust, estimated at 43 miles per hour, struck the balloon from the west, causing it to tilt dramatically eastward and rise another 20 feet. The sudden upward force lifted 3 handlers on the eastern side completely off their feet. Phoebe shouted to her team to hold steady while the balloon continued rising. The balloon reached approximately 65 feet in altitude, and the guide ropes were at maximum tension. The front left rope that Phoebe was gripping suddenly snapped at a connection point near the balloon. The severed rope, still under extreme tension, recoiled violently downward and backward, the frayed end traveling at approximately 70 miles per hour. The rope struck Phoebe across her face and neck, the impact fracturing her jaw, shattering her left cheekbone, and crushing her larynx. She was thrown backward approximately 6 feet by the force of the impact, landing on her back on the asphalt parade route, with her head striking the ground. The impact with the ground caused a basilar skull fracture and immediate loss of consciousness. Blood began flowing from her nose, mouth, and left ear, classic signs of severe head trauma, while her body exhibited rigid posturing with arms and legs extended. Parade officials immediately halted the procession, and emergency medical personnel rushed to Phoebe's location. She was found unresponsive with irregular breathing and a weak pulse. Her pupils were unequal, the left dilated and non-reactive, the right constricted, indicating severe brain injury and increased intracranial pressure. Paramedics established an airway and began ventilation while preparing for immediate transport to the nearest trauma center. Her parents, who had witnessed the accident from the bleachers, were restrained by security as they attempted to reach her. Phoebe was transported to the trauma center, where emergency scans revealed massive intracranial hemorrhaging and severe brain swelling. Phoebe Larson was pronounced dead that afternoon after neurological testing confirmed complete cessation of brain activity. The parade was immediately canceled, and all balloon portions of future parades were suspended. Investigation revealed that the rope had been in service for 7 years, 2 years beyond its recommended replacement schedule. Her parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the parade organizers. The incident prompted multiple cities to revise their parade balloon safety guidelines, updating wind limits and equipment replacement schedules. It was February 16, 2015, when 38-year-old Grant Nichols arrived at the demolition site in Dallas, Texas, for what should have been the culmination of 6 weeks of meticulous planning. Grant was a demolition engineer and explosives expert who had overseen 67 successful building demolitions during his 14-year career. He specialized in urban demolitions requiring precise explosive placement to ensure structures collapsed inward without damaging surrounding buildings. Known for his methodical approach, Grant had earned a reputation as one of the most reliable demolition specialists in the Southwest. The project involved demolishing an 11-story office building that had been vacant for 3 years. Grant had spent 6 weeks planning the demolition, placing 847 individual explosive charges at strategic points throughout the building's support structure. The demolition was scheduled for Sunday morning to minimize traffic and ensure maximum safety. A 500-meter safety perimeter had been established, with police blocking roads and evacuating nearby buildings. Local news stations had been invited to broadcast the demolition live. Grant's observation position was in a reinforced command trailer located 550 meters south of the building. His wife, Rebecca, and their 8-year-old son, Tyle, were watching the broadcast from home. Grant performed his final safety check and initiated the firing sequence. The first series of explosions detonated on the building's ground floor as planned. The building's south side began collapsing inward as dust clouds billowed outward. An anomaly occurred. The building's north side failed to collapse as programmed, remaining partially standing while the south side fell. This created an unbalanced load that caused the remaining north structure to tilt southward rather than collapsing straight down. Grant immediately recognized the failure and shouted for everyone to move back. The tilting north section, approximately 6 stories of concrete and steel, weighing an estimated 2,400 tons, began falling southward like a toppling tree. The structure fell outside the planned collapse zone, aimed directly toward the safety perimeter, where emergency vehicles were positioned. Grant, realizing the danger to personnel, made the decision to leave the command trailer and run toward the perimeter to warn people. He exited the trailer and began sprinting north, waving his arms. The collapsing north section struck the ground approximately 480 meters from the original building footprint. The impact sent a pressure wave through the debris field, hurling concrete fragments and steel sections outward. A 12-foot length of number 11 rebar, weighing roughly 60 pounds, was launched by the force and struck Grant from behind while he was still running toward the perimeter. The bar hit across his upper back and neck at an estimated 30 miles per hour, severing his spinal cord at the C3 vertebra and fracturing his skull. Although the injury caused instantaneous loss of motor control, the remaining forward momentum carried his body several feet. Grant was thrown forward roughly 10 feet, his body tumbling across the ground before coming to rest face down. Television cameras had inadvertently captured Grant's final moments. Emergency personnel reached Grant, finding him unresponsive with no pulse. His neck was visibly deformed, and blood was flowing from his nose and ears. Paramedics began CPR, despite the obvious severity of his injuries. Grant Nichols was pronounced dead at the scene from a traumatic spinal cord transection and severe head trauma. The inquiry uncovered that a trio of demolition charges malfunctioned because of defective electrical connections, resulting in an uneven structural failure. The contracting firm faced legal liability proceedings and contract termination, which ultimately led to its insolvency. The incident led to updated demolition protocols, including mandatory secondary detonation verification checks before final firing sequences. It was July 9, 2016, when 33-year-old Jetta Howard arrived at the base camp in Chamonix, French Alps, for what should have been a routine mountain rescue operation. Jetta was a Norwegian mountain rescue specialist and paramedic who had been working in alpine rescue operations for 9 years. Known for her technical climbing skills and calm demeanor during high-stress operations, she had successfully participated in over 200 mountain rescues. The rescue operation involved extracting an injured climber from a steep rock face at approximately 11,150 feet elevation on Mont Blanc. A documentary crew had been filming a series about mountain rescue operations and had been granted live relay access for a regional alpine emergency broadcast, with helicopter footage transmitted in real time to local television affiliates. The injured climber, a German tourist, had fallen approximately 30 feet and sustained a compound leg fracture requiring immediate helicopter extraction. Weather conditions were marginal for helicopter operations, with gusty winds averaging 25 miles per hour and occasional stronger gusts. Jetta had been selected as the rescue specialist to be lowered from the helicopter due to her experience with technical extractions. The helicopter pilot was a French aviator with 22 years of alpine flying experience. The helicopter departed with Jetta secured in a rescue harness connected to a 100-foot steel cable winch system. The helicopter reached the injured climber's position and began hovering approximately 80 feet above the rock face. Jetta was lowered from the helicopter while carrying medical equipment and a rescue litter. She reached the injured climber and began assessing his injuries while communicating with the helicopter crew via radio. While Jetta was securing the climber into the rescue litter, a sudden wind gust estimated at 40 miles per hour struck the helicopter from the west. The helicopter was pushed approximately 50 feet eastward, causing the cable to swing dramatically. A second, stronger gust struck the helicopter, causing it to drop approximately 30 feet suddenly. The sudden descent created slack in the cable, which then snapped taut again, creating a violent whipping motion. Jetta was caught off balance and lost her grip on the rock face. The helicopter was struck by a third gust, an updraft that lifted the aircraft suddenly upward approximately 40 feet. The rapid ascent put extreme tension on the cable system, which was rated for 2,000 pounds but was now supporting dynamic loading. The cable attachment point on Jetta's harness, a carabiner that had been in service for 4 years, failed under the stress. Investigators later determined that the violent swing had side-loaded the gate, twisting it out of alignment. The carabiner gate broke open under the load, and Jetta separated from the cable, beginning an immediate free fall from approximately 95 feet above the rock face. Her body fell for approximately 2.1 seconds, rotating backward as she dropped. She struck a sloping rock face at approximately 52 miles per hour, impacting primarily on her back and left side. The initial impact fractured her spine at T7 and T8 vertebrae, shattered her left shoulder blade, and broke 4 ribs. Her body bounced off the sloping rock and continued falling, tumbling through the air for another 40 feet before striking a second, more vertical rock face. The second impact occurred head first, crushing her helmet and fracturing her skull in multiple places, with bone fragments driven into her brain tissue. She bounced again and fell another 60 feet, her body now limp, before striking a narrow ledge. The final impact broke both legs, her pelvis, and her right arm. She came to rest approximately 195 feet below her initial position. The entire fall was captured by both the helicopter-mounted camera and a fixed base camp relay feed. The footage was still transmitting live when the fall occurred, giving viewers only a few seconds of the incident before the broadcast was abruptly cut from the control room. The injured climber witnessed the fall directly from his position in the rescue litter. A second rescue team reached Yetta's position, finding her unresponsive with massive trauma. Yetta Howard was pronounced dead at the scene from multiple traumatic injuries incompatible with life. Investigation revealed the carabiner failure was due to metal fatigue from repeated loading cycles, leading to new equipment replacement protocols. The injured climber survived but required extensive psychological treatment. It was April 12, 2016 in Cleveland, Ohio. The noon broadcast at a small local station began like any other weekday. The studio lights bright, the air conditioned, and the newsroom running on its usual tense rhythm. No one imagined that a routine food segment would end in a tragedy that unfolded in seconds. Melissa Harding, 39, had worked at the station for 6 years as a midday anchor. She had built her career on projecting authority, but inside the newsroom she was known more for her sharp tone and constant demands than for teamwork. She frequently berated interns and producers over minor issues, often treating her position as a platform for control rather than collaboration. Colleagues recalled her habit of eating during breaks, sometimes even mid-broadcast, and how she scolded staff if snacks were missing from her desk. Her polished on-air presence contrasted with her impatience off-camera, a contradiction that sometimes pushed her into careless behavior. The environment of a live broadcast demands discipline. Anchors must transition seamlessly between stories, follow precise timing, and maintain clear diction under pressure. Any distraction, whether equipment failure, misplaced notes, or food consumption, can disrupt the rhythm of a program. Producers routinely reminded Harding of the risks of eating while cued, particularly during lighter segments. Like many anchors, she assumed her routines were safe. And in a setting where dozens of decisions happened every minute, one overlooked caution could shift events dramatically. That day's lineup featured a short segment promoting a local deli. Harding was irritated about the rushed preparation and snapped at an assistant who brought out a sample plate she deemed poorly presented. Off camera, she ate several bites while waiting for her cue, ignoring reminders to hold off until the live demonstration. Control room staff noted her impatience, but the broadcast proceeded as scheduled. As cameras rolled, she transitioned from a local story into casual banter, having just swallowed a bite when her airway suddenly caught. On live television, the accident began without warning. Mid-sentence, her voice broke into a strained wheeze. Her eyes widened, and she froze, one hand moving to her throat. Viewers saw her knock over a coffee mug as she staggered sideways, panic evident. Her co-anchor reached across the desk, slapping her on the back, but the obstruction remained. Within less than a minute, her legs buckled and she collapsed, toppling her chair with a crash. The control room erupted in chaos. Floor crew rushed onto set, shouting for emergency services as the station abruptly cut to commercial, after nearly 20 seconds of live struggle. On the studio floor, producers attempted the Heimlich maneuver multiple times. Witnesses recalled her nails scraping the table as she convulsed, her complexion turning dusky blue. Staff tilted her forward, trying to clear her airway, but the blockage held. Paramedics arrived within minutes using suction and advanced airway equipment. Despite intervention, the obstruction remained sealed. She was transported to a nearby hospital but pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Medical examiners later confirmed a dense piece of deli meat had completely lodged in her trachea, cutting off airflow. Her funeral drew family but only a handful of co-workers. Many declined to attend, citing grievances over her treatment of colleagues. The service was subdued, reflecting a career marked more by friction than friendship. The station issued a brief statement of condolence and immediately pulled the archived segment from circulation. It was June 18, 2016 in Austin, Texas. The Midsummer Festival was packed with families crowding the streets and local television crews moving between camera points to prepare for the evening broadcast. The night was clear after earlier storms had delayed events, and while the festival looked lively and controlled on screen, behind the stage, rushed work and overlooked safety margins set the conditions for a fatal mistake. Thomas Reed, 28, was a freelance stage rigger hired through a small production company contracted for the broadcast. He had years of experience setting up truss systems, lights, and support lines, but had a reputation for saying yes to last-minute calls, even when conditions weren't ideal. Colleagues knew him as precise, though his willingness to bend to production pressures often left him working without full preparation. Freelancers like him rarely had the luxury of refusing work, especially when tied to high-visibility broadcasts, where networks and sponsors demanded speed over caution. Stage rigging is inherently dangerous. Heavy lighting units suspended overhead, fire cues positioned around tightly packed equipment, and live performers moving close to unsecured hazards. It relies on exact placement and spacing, especially when pyrotechnics are added. Even small errors in distance between mortars and flammable rigging increase the risk of catastrophic failure. That night, Reed had been called in to reposition lines after weather delays compressed the setup schedule. Checks that should have taken an hour were condensed into minutes, leaving little margin for oversight. The segment he worked on was particularly hazardous. A local TV affiliate had scheduled a live fireworks cue as part of the show finale, a risky choice given the proximity to stage equipment. Crew members later admitted the pyrotechnic checks were cut short, with a mortar placed only a few feet from overhead rigging to accommodate the camera's street angle. Festival organizers had already pushed the timing back, and the decision was made to move ahead despite warnings from two technicians that spacing was tight. With the crowd already in place and live airtime approaching, the call to proceed was locked in. Eyewitnesses recalled Reed pacing near the edge of the stage, adjusting a line that ran across the truss frame above the fireworks setup. A technician off-frame called ready, and the first shells launched successfully, rising clean into the night. As the second was triggered, it misfired, igniting partially inside the launch tube. Cameras caught the resulting flare and shower of sparks that spread across the lower stage area, where Reed was working just feet from the ignition point. The misfire sent sparks and burning fragments across the platform, scorching nearby rigging and striking equipment. A sound technician later described fragments of casing and burning debris, some large enough to fill a hand, raining down as the truss ignited. Reed was struck by shrapnel in the chest and face and caught in the shower of sparks. His figure was visibly collapsing as others rushed forward. Crew members scrambled through sparks and heat, some calling for emergency, while two men pulled Reed's limp body from the hazard zone. His clothing and harness smoked heavily, and his exposed skin was blackened and blistering. He was still breathing when medics arrived, though barely responsive. They secured his airway with intubation and began aggressive fluid resuscitation before transport. Emergency responders administered immediate care before transporting him to a regional hospital. By then, Reed had sustained third-degree burns over much of his torso, blunt trauma from the impact of the fragments, and inhalation injuries. He was pronounced dead the following day after repeated efforts to stabilize him failed. The aftermath played out unevenly. The pyrotechnics vendor was cited and fined, but no charges stuck. The affiliate quietly ended live fireworks segments, though without a public announcement, and city officials pushed new permitting requirements that most festival organizers only reluctantly adopted. For Reed's parents, the investigation meant little. The final report reduced their son to crew member fatally injured, a line item in a binder that marked how the show had gone wrong. It was November 8, 2016, in Nairobi, Kenya. The local news station's Westlands headquarters was packed with guests, contributors, and staff rushing between cameras during election night coverage. The broadcast gave the appearance of controlled energy, but behind the glass doors, poor security planning and an unchecked flow of visitors left the building exposed. Daniel Mwangi, 22, worked as a freelance camera assistant and part-time studio driver. He had been with the station only a few months, running feeds, helping with deliveries, and occasionally assisting with setup. Colleagues described him as reliable and eager, someone who accepted extra tasks without complaint in hopes of landing steadier work. His income was modest, but the job gave him connections in production, and he wanted to prove himself. Friends knew he took risks less out of recklessness than out of a desire to be noticed in a competitive field. Broadcast environments like this rely on layered security, controlled access points, credential checks, and monitoring in lobbies where live guests and volunteers gather. When those measures break down, the open floor plan becomes a liability. Election night added further strain. The station had multiple live feeds running simultaneously, extra chairs and cameras cluttering the atrium, and fewer guards than scheduled because of a staffing error. The lobby became a bottleneck with hurried movement, live mics nearby, and no reliable control over who entered. That night's broadcast was already running tight. Visitors passed through quickly, with reception distracted by constant arrivals. Crew recalled noticing a visibly agitated man outside earlier, arguing with a political contributor. Rather than increase caution, the pace of coverage pushed staff to focus on keeping the program moving. No additional security was brought in. The man later entered the lobby unchecked, shouting as he surged past the desk. Eyewitnesses remembered the sharp crack as glass splintered when the man fired a shot into the ceiling. Panic spread as volunteers ducked behind chairs and producers scrambled toward the stage. The shooter's second discharge hit near the ground, scattering debris. In the middle of the atrium, Daniel, carrying a coil of coax cable, moved with two other crew members toward the man in a split-second decision to intervene. Daniel lunged in, briefly grabbing the man's arm in an attempt to disrupt him while another crew member tried to force him backward. A violent struggle followed. The shooter twisted free. A muzzle flash briefly illuminated the atrium, and witnesses saw Daniel collapsing. The round struck his torso at close range. Chaos followed, crew pulling back, fire alarms blaring, and guests pressed against walls as staff pulled the injured away from the attacker's reach. Producers stopped the live segment mid-broadcast, cutting abruptly to off-site coverage while alarms echoed in the background. Paramedics arrived within minutes after being called by the staff. They performed chest compressions in the lobby before transporting him. He was admitted in critical condition, but died shortly after from severe internal hemorrhage from a gunshot to the torso. The shooter was restrained by officers outside the building less than 5 minutes later. Daniel's courage left an immediate imprint on his colleagues. Fellow production workers shared stories of his split-second decision to shield others, and a memorial wall was set up at the station with notes, photographs, and equipment he had used. His family took solace in seeing the community recognize his bravery, turning mourning into a narrative of courage and lasting impact. It was August 17, 2017, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The morning was clear, and inside the downtown television studio, producers hurried to finalize the day's live broadcast. On the schedule was a wildlife education segment featuring a python, an animal considered safe under routine handling but unpredictable in the heat and noise of a studio. Daniel Park, 31, was a volunteer animal technician from a small regional wildlife center. He had spent years working with reptiles in controlled habitats, feeding, cleaning, and assisting with veterinary checks. Only recently had he begun stepping into public demonstrations, encouraged by the center's outreach staff. By temperament, he was mild and methodical, someone who trusted routine over improvisation. His motivation was straightforward, raising awareness to secure more donors for the struggling facility. He was not reckless, but he often bent to requests from hosts and producers to make the animals seem more engaging. Non-venomous pythons, though not dangerous under proper management, are powerful constrictors. Stress factors like heat, lights, and sudden noise increase the chance of defensive tightening. Standard practice requires 2 trained handlers and a controlled environment, but live television often skipped safeguards for timing and simplicity. That morning, Daniel arrived with a secure crate containing a 6-foot python. The animal was healthy but known to grow restless under overstimulation. The segment was squeezed into a tight window. Producers pushed Daniel to have the snake out quickly and even suggested draping it around an anchor. Hesitant but cooperative, he complied, hoping to preserve the center's relationship with the station. The studio was hotter than expected, with lamps and microphones raising the temperature. Several staffers later recalled how rushed it felt. Daniel knelt to guide the python out, speaking calmly but moving faster than usual. The snake coiled onto his arm at first, but its movements grew sharper. Instead of pausing to settle it, Daniel stepped toward the cameras, following the producer's cue. Control room staff noticed his posture stiffen as the snake wrapped higher across his chest. The first sign of trouble was subtle. His arm tensed as he tried to adjust his grip. Within seconds, the python locked in, wrapping firmly around his torso. On air, the host's expression shifted from a forced smile to alarm as Daniel leaned back, pulling at the coils. Witnesses saw his breath shorten. Assistants rushed in, trying to pry the snake loose, but it tightened further with the commotion. One staffer dialed 911. Cameras briefly captured the struggle before control cut to an emergency slate. Daniel remained upright but visibly strained, his face reddening. Moments later, his knees buckled as the snake compressed his chest. A medic on standby for another segment attempted to intervene, and staff used scissors to partially free him, but Daniel had already collapsed from cardiac arrhythmia caused by oxygen deprivation. Paramedics transported him to a nearby hospital, but he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The snake was returned unharmed to the Wildlife Center, placed back into a controlled habitat. The station suspended live animal features, cutting the segment from archives and halting future broadcasts pending review. At the Wildlife Center, the tragedy prompted an overhaul of outreach. Live demonstrations were limited to pre-recorded segments, with a veterinarian or senior technician mandated for handling. It was September 9, 2018, in San Diego, California. The morning sky was clear but carried unpredictable winds at higher altitude. Crowds gathered along the waterfront for a televised promotional air event. Few realized that timing adjustments and hurried decisions would soon turn a spectacle into disaster. Mark Levin, 39, was a freelance aerial camera operator with more than a decade of broadcast experience. He had built his reputation on reliability, moving between regional affiliates and local sponsors. Known for saying yes to last-minute calls, Mark often accepted assignments with little preparation. Though not reckless, he tended to prioritize getting the shot over double-checking safety margins. The airshow contract had come through at the 11th hour, and he agreed without hesitation, motivated by steady pay and the chance to expand his portfolio. Shooting an airshow required specialized placement. Mark was stationed on a scaffolding lift just outside the crowd line, positioned for a clear angle on formations. He carried a stabilized long lens and headset for live direction. The setup gave him unobstructed sight lines, but minimal protection compared to an enclosed tower. Under normal conditions, the risk of debris was remote but not absent, especially with tight formation flying. His headset linked him to the director's booth, ensuring he tracked formations across the skyline. That day's complication came from shifting winds. Pilots were briefed on shear at certain altitudes, complicating precision timing. Instead of delaying, teams agreed to minor adjustments. One pair, under pressure to stay on schedule for broadcast, committed to flying closer than usual. Safety officers flagged the move as unnecessary, but the show proceeded. Mark, focused on the broadcast line, remained in position despite the narrower margin. As the routine began, ground cameras followed smoke trails curving upward. Mark's feed showed cross maneuvers threading against blue sky, and producers cued his angle for the broadcast. Witnesses later said the formations looked rushed, spacing tighter than typical. Tension built as the teams moved into a weaving pattern, their aircraft converging in split-second timing. At the peak of the maneuver, two planes clipped wings. Viewers watching live saw the sudden spray of fragments and one aircraft spiraling down. The crowd gasped as metal and flames streaked across the sky. From the scaffolding, Mark had the direct line of sight. His camera tracked the uncontrolled tumble until wreckage began breaking apart. A broken strut and fuselage panel separated in mid-air, dropping toward the spectator zone. Falling from several hundred feet, the section slammed into Mark's platform with enough force to buckle its frame. Witnesses described a metallic thunderclap as the impact shook the scaffolding violently, throwing him over the guardrail. Crew nearby shouted for help as he fell, striking the ground hard. On the live feed, the screen cut between the anchor's shocked expression and emergency vehicles rushing onto the field. Medics arrived within moments, but Mark had sustained fatal trauma. He was pronounced dead at the scene, alongside 2 pilots who perished in the crash. His equipment lay twisted and broken, the lens shattered on the pavement. The station suspended live aerial coverage indefinitely, not just as a procedural step, but as acknowledgement of the risks their crews faced. Staff who witnessed the crash organized internal safety reviews, rewriting procedures for camera placement and platform stability. It was June 17, 2015, in Seattle, Washington. A bright summer morning framed a television studio's outdoor set, where crews rushed to prepare for a segment of a home improvement program. The scene felt routine, but beneath it lay a structural flaw, an error that would not forgive even a moment of wait. Jerry Mills, 45, was a contractor with 2 decades of remodeling experience. He ran a small business serving mostly residential clients and had built a reputation as a no-nonsense worker who finished jobs quickly. Off camera, colleagues described him as brash and sometimes careless, but audiences liked his energy and plain explanations. He had become a regular guest on the program, a way to generate business and remain visible in a crowded market. Promoted as a trusted expert, he thrived on the attention. Construction for television differed from real jobs. Instead of months, he had minutes to show a process. Producers wanted speed, visuals, and minimal dead time. Jerry worked with standard carpentry tools and fasteners, but instead of a house frame, he often demonstrated on temporary stages dressed to look authentic. Time pressures meant corners were cut, but he believed he could handle the risks. For him, exposure outweighed hesitation. That day's segment involved a simulated backyard deck installation. Producers had ordered a raised platform to serve as the demonstration surface. The structure was built quickly by stagehands, not carpenters, and its stability relied on several adjustable jacks beneath the frame. One jack looked stable at first but was not fully seated, creating a weakness that showed only when weight shifted onto the outer corner. No inspection was scheduled, and the problem went unnoticed. The audience sat less than 10 feet away, and there was no second rehearsal. Jerry arrived with his tool belt, ready to demonstrate how a ledger board connected to a wall frame. He stepped to the platform's outer corner, which carried the hidden fault. The host introduced him as cameras rolled, the crowd of about 40 applauding. The atmosphere looked polished and safe, yet the corner under him flexed more than expected. As he hammered the first nails, a sharp crack cut through the air. Witnesses saw the platform shift and sag toward the audience. The sound escalated into a snap, and the corner dropped suddenly. Jerry lost balance, falling forward as the structure collapsed beneath him. The drop was only 3 feet, but he struck his chest against a concrete prop before his head hit another edge. Live cameras caught everything. The anchor's expression freezing, audience members shouting, crew running into frame. Stage assistants rushed to pull a tarp across the scene while others called emergency responders. Jerry still moved, but his breathing was shallow, blood marking the side of his head. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transferred him to Harborview Medical Center. Despite treatment, he was pronounced dead later that evening. The aftermath centered on a wrongful death suit filed by Jerry's family against the network and its contractors. It alleged that the platform had been assembled without inspection and that safety was sacrificed for production speed. The settlement was undisclosed, but the program soon disappeared from schedules, a quiet acknowledgement of liability without public admission. It was October 13, 2008, in Santo André, São Paulo, Brazil, and 15-year-old Eloa Cristina Pimentel was at home working on a school project with her friend Nayara Rodriguez da Silva and 2 male classmates. The afternoon study session was meant to be routine preparation for upcoming exams, with textbooks and notebooks scattered across the small apartment's dining table. Eloa was a bright student with dreams of becoming a teacher, her warm smile and infectious laughter making her popular among her peers at the local high school. The cramped apartment on Rua Antonio Cardoso had become Eloa's sanctuary after her family moved there 3 years earlier. Her mother worked double shifts at a local textile factory to support them, often leaving Eloa to care for her younger siblings while maintaining excellent grades. Despite the financial struggles, Eloa remained optimistic about her future, spending hours tutoring younger students and volunteering at the neighborhood community center. Her teachers consistently praised her maturity and dedication, seeing in her the potential to break the cycle of poverty that trapped so many in their working-class neighborhood. The relationship with Lindenberg had begun when Eloa was just 11 years old, an age gap that should have raised immediate concerns among adults in their community. What started as innocent childhood affection had gradually transformed into something darker as Lindenberg's possessive tendencies emerged. Friends and family members later recalled how he would become jealous when Eloa spoke to other boys, monitoring her activities and demanding to know her whereabouts at all times. When Eloa finally found the courage to end the relationship at age 13, Lindenberg's behavior became increasingly erratic and threatening. But that afternoon, their quiet study session took a dark turn when Eloa's 22-year-old ex-boyfriend, Lindenberg Fernandez Alves, suddenly entered the apartment with a firearm. The relationship had ended 2 years earlier when Eloa was just 13, but Lindenberg had never accepted the breakup. Reports later revealed he had become obsessed with her, unable to move on from their teenage romance that had grown increasingly possessive and unhealthy. Lindenberg let the 2 boys leave but kept Eloa and Nayara inside, starting a hostage situation that would last 5 days and be broadcast across Brazil. Police quickly responded, with the Special Tactical Actions Group, known as GATE, taking over and beginning negotiations, hoping to resolve the situation peacefully. The next evening, Nayara was released unharmed, but 2 days later, police made a surprising and dangerous move. They asked the 15-year-old to go back into the apartment, saying her presence might help calm Lindenberg. As the situation dragged on, media attention exploded. News outlets provided live updates day and night, and the case became a national obsession. Things went even further when Rede TV journalist Sonia Abro called Lindenberg live on air while he was still inside with the girls. She spoke with both him and Eloa, and the call was broadcast to the whole country. Legal experts later said the call interfered with the police operation, with a civil case filed against Abro, accusing her of putting lives at risk. By October 17th, the standoff had gone on for over 100 hours. Police said they heard gunshots and decided to break in. GATE, along with military police shock troops, forced their way inside. Lindenberg resisted, and during the struggle he used the firearm. Nayara was injured in the face but managed to leave the apartment alive. Eloa was hit twice, once in the head and once in the lower body. Cameras were rolling as she was carried out unconscious and taken to a hospital, but she didn't survive. On October 18th, doctors declared her brain dead at 11:30 p.m., and she was removed from life support. Her organs were later donated and saved 7 lives. Around 10,000 people attended Eloa's funeral. Nayara survived and went through a long recovery, and in 2018, she was awarded 150,000 Brazilian reais in damages after the court found the state responsible for what she had gone through. Lindenberg was sentenced to 39 years and 3 months in prison, and to this day, Eloa's story remains one of Brazil's most disturbing and tragic cases. It was September 27, 2007 in Yangon, Myanmar, and for 10 days, crowds had taken to the streets in peaceful protest. Buddhist monks in red robes led the demonstrations, walking calmly and chanting for freedom. What began as protests against rising fuel prices had become something much bigger. People were now calling for democracy, frustrated with poverty, military rule, and the lack of basic rights. In the middle of all this was 50-year-old Kenji Nagai, a Japanese journalist who had arrived just 2 days earlier. He worked for a small outlet called APF News, and Kenji had spent years reporting from dangerous places. Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine. His mission was always the same: go where others wouldn't and show what was really happening. He was known for his dedication to capturing the truth, no matter the personal risk involved. Kenji's colleagues often described him as fearless but never reckless, a man who understood the weight of documenting history as it unfolded. His small apartment in Tokyo was filled with awards and photographs from conflict zones around the world, each image telling a story of human suffering and resilience that mainstream media often overlooked. Despite offers from larger news organizations, Kenji remained loyal to APF News, believing that independent journalism was crucial for exposing injustices that powerful governments preferred to keep hidden. The veteran war correspondent had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when situations were about to turn violent, a skill that had kept him alive through countless dangerous assignments. His camera equipment was always within arm's reach, and he had trained himself to continue shooting even under the most extreme circumstances. Friends back in Japan worried about his increasingly dangerous assignments, but Kenji felt compelled to bear witness to the struggles of oppressed people worldwide, viewing his work as a sacred duty rather than just a profession. That morning, Kenji stood near the Sula Pagoda in downtown Yangon, the area full of protesters waving flags with the peacock symbol linked to Aung San Suu Kyi's political party. Despite the tense mood, the crowd remained peaceful until military trucks showed up. Soldiers got out holding rifles and shields, and protesters stayed put, some yelling at the troops. The military government saw these gatherings not as peaceful, but as a direct threat, issuing a clear warning: leave in 10 minutes or face the consequences. Then came the military's response. First tear gas, then gunfire. First into the air, then directly into the crowd. Kenji kept filming, his last recorded words caught on camera. The army has just arrived. The army is over there. They are heavily armed. Then the shooting began, and Kenji was hit and fell to the ground. Even then, witnesses say he continued to hold up his camera, trying to document what was happening around him. A photo by Reuters photographer Adres Latif captured a haunting scene. Kenji lying on the ground, a soldier standing over him with rifle in hand, his camera still in his grip. In the next frame, the soldier walked away and Kenji didn't move again. At first, the Myanmar government claimed he had been caught in the crossfire, but video evidence later showed the truth. A soldier had pushed Kenji to the ground and shot him at close range. An autopsy in Japan confirmed this. The bullet had gone through his chest, hit his heart, and exited from his back. Kenji was the only foreigner to lose his life during the protests, with at least 9 others also dying. News of Kenji's death shocked people in Japan, with the government demanding answers that never came. Myanmar later apologized, but no action was taken. In 2023, 16 years later, journalists said they had received Kenji's missing camera from someone who wanted to set things right. The camera was returned to his sister, and that final footage showed the protests, the chants, the chaos, and Kenji's final moments. No one has ever been held accountable, but Kenji's work hasn't been forgotten. The Burma Media Association created the Kenji Nagai Award to honor journalists in Myanmar. It was sometime in 2003 during an episode of Consejo de Mujeres, a Mexican daytime talk show aimed at women. The program typically covered topics like lifestyle, health, and beauty, and occasionally featured live animals for educational segments. On this particular day, 2 animal handlers from a local zoo were invited to introduce a young lion cub as part of a segment about wildlife conservation. The handlers were seated with the lion between them, and nearby, a mother sat holding her young daughter, who was calmly enjoying a lollipop while looking around the studio. Everything seemed fine. Despite being a cub, the lion was already large and powerful, sitting on a leash and appearing relaxed. The handlers and show hosts were calm, and the mother and her daughter showed no sign of fear. No safety barriers or protective measures were in place between the lion and the studio audience. But then something unexpected happened. The little girl let out a soft whimper, and the high-pitched sound caught the lion's attention. It stood up and stared directly at her. The handlers quickly tried to get it to settle down, and it obeyed for a moment. Then the child began to cry louder, and without warning, the lion lunged. It grabbed the girl's legs with its front paws and bit down. The studio filled with screams as the mother stood up and tried to pull her daughter close, but the lion didn't let go. It pulled back, its grip unshaken. The handlers rushed in, one trying to pry open the lion's mouth, the other holding the animal's body. The child kept screaming as her mother clutched her tightly. The trainers, speaking rapidly in Spanish, repeated instructions like, "Stay calm and don't move," as they tried to control the situation. It took several moments before they could separate the animal from the child. One handler held the lion's head while the other pulled its body back. Eventually, they managed to get the lion to release its grip, and the girl was finally freed, crying and in shock. Her mother immediately checked her for injuries. What happened next left many viewers confused. The mother suddenly laughed. Some believed it was a reaction to the intense stress, a confused emotional response after what had just happened. Others were unsettled by how casual everyone on set seemed afterward. One of the handlers leaned in to hug both the mother and child, and the lion, still present, was even shown on camera again, while the child's cries continued in the background. The show awkwardly continued with forced laughter and uneasy smiles. Years later, when the footage was uploaded to YouTube, viewers began to notice unsettling details. Before the lion lunged, it had been staring at the child for several moments, and at one point the camera zoomed in on its face as if capturing something that was about to unfold. Though the child wasn't seriously injured, specialists warned about the long-term emotional effects of such an event. Strangely, no legal action was ever taken. The lion remained with the handlers, and the child's identity was never revealed. She was never publicly seen again. It was 1979 in Clearwater, Florida, when a new Christian-themed kids show called Joy Junction aired on the Christian television network. It featured colorful characters like Sheriff Dawn, Professor Cloudhopper, Whistler Dan, and a ventriloquist named Ron, who performed with his puppet Marty. The show focused on fun and faith, teaching kids about values, kindness, and staying away from bad influences. Ronald William Brown, the man behind the Ron character, was also active in his local Largo, Florida church community. He regularly hosted puppet shows, gave kids rides to church in the church van, and even invited them over for pizza before Bible study. To many parents, he seemed kind and trustworthy, exactly the type of person they wanted influencing their children. The show quickly became popular, with parents loving its wholesome message and kids enjoying the songs, games, and lessons. Soon, Joy Junction expanded nationally, airing on major Christian networks like Trinity Broadcasting and Family Network. It ran for nearly 20 years, from 1979 into the early 2000s, reaching thousands of homes across America. Brown used his platform to teach children about resisting temptation and staying on the right path, all while hiding something much darker behind his wholesome image. In 1998, police stopped Brown and found children's underwear in his vehicle. He claimed they were props for his puppets, and authorities let him go with no further action taken. Years passed without incident until 2012, when investigators looking into an online network involved in disturbing activities came across a man from Kansas named Michael Arnett. When they searched his computer, they found highly inappropriate images involving children, some posed in staged settings. But what really stood out were the chat logs. Arnett had been exchanging messages with a man in Florida, and that man was Ronald Brown. The two had been talking for months on a hidden forum, their conversations going beyond possession of inappropriate content to include detailed and graphic discussions involving children. Brown referenced a boy he knew personally from church, speaking of deeply troubling intentions and sharing diagrams and pictures he had secretly taken of the child. On July 19, 2012, authorities raided Brown's home in Largo. What they found was deeply alarming. Thousands of illegal files, some involving deceased children, along with written plans, drawings, and content dating back to 1978, a year before Joy Junction began. Brown was arrested and charged with possession and intent to commit serious harm against a minor. He admitted to the chats but claimed it was all fantasy and that he never planned to act on it. The court didn't believe him, and he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, essentially a life sentence given his age and health. In 2020, Brown died in prison at the age of 65 due to complications from a neurological illness. After his arrest, everything connected to Joy Junction went silent. Networks removed all traces of the show with no statements or press releases, and even cast members distanced themselves. For a long time, the show became lost media, with only a few clips surviving, mainly from old VHS tapes uploaded to YouTube. Ronald Brown wasn't just a performer. He was trusted by parents, surrounded by children, and active in the community, which makes this case so disturbing. It was 1992 in Manchester, England, when Bobby Davro, a well-known comedian and TV personality, was filming the final scene of his show, Public Enemy Number 1. Bobby was popular for his high-energy performances, and physical fitness was a big part of his life. His father, Bill Nankivell, was once an Olympic runner, and Bobby stayed active through his work. At 34, Bobby had built his career on fearless physical comedy that often pushed the boundaries of safety. His willingness to endure pain for laughs had made him a household name across Britain, with audiences tuning in specifically to watch him throw himself into increasingly elaborate stunts. The Manchester studio had become his second home over the past 3 years, and the crew had grown accustomed to Bobby's relentless perfectionism and his insistence on performing every stunt himself rather than using body doubles. Bobby's athletic background gave him confidence in physical challenges that would intimidate other performers. He had trained in gymnastics as a teenager and maintained his flexibility through daily workouts, believing that his conditioning would protect him from serious injury. His colleagues often marveled at his ability to bounce back from minor bumps and bruises that would sideline other entertainers for days. This particular filming day had proceeded smoothly, with Bobby completing several demanding sequences without complaint or hesitation. The scene they were filming was meant to be lighthearted. Bobby was locked into a wooden stocks prop, his head and hands sticking through the holes, while his fellow entertainers Keith Chegwin, Lionel Blair, and Jim Bowen threw tomatoes at him. It was supposed to be harmless fun, the kind of physical comedy that Bobby was known for. But the prop wasn't secure, and Bobby had to balance himself on a box because the floor beneath him was hard concrete. The setup seemed routine, just another day of filming comedy sketches with his colleagues. Bobby had performed countless physical stunts throughout his career without incident, and this particular scene was supposed to be one of the easier ones. The wooden stocks were meant to hold him in place while his friends pelted him with tomatoes for laughs, creating the kind of slapstick humor that audiences loved. Suddenly, Bobby lost his balance. With his arms trapped in the wooden restraints, he couldn't stop himself from falling. He hit the ground face first, and Keith Chegwin later said the sound of Bobby's head hitting the concrete was one of the worst he'd ever heard. Thankfully, Bobby managed to turn his head slightly mid-fall, which likely protected him from even worse injuries, but he still cut his chin open and briefly lost consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors were surprised to find that he hadn't broken his nose or lost any teeth. However, he suffered a neck injury from the impact and was diagnosed with whiplash. He was told to rest, but although filming had finished, the pain in his neck continued and spread to other areas of his body. Bobby later visited an osteopath who used physical therapy to ease his symptoms. Recovery took about 6 weeks, and he eventually regained movement, but the pain never fully went away. For a while, he couldn't even do basic exercises like sit-ups, and even years later, Bobby still deals with pain in his neck and upper back. Long car rides are difficult, and sometimes he experiences arm pain and headaches caused by nerve pressure. The fall was never aired, but the BBC now uses the clip for training purposes to show how fast accidents can happen, even in a controlled setting. Bobby never received compensation for what happened, as at the time, it wasn't common to file injury claims like it is today. It was December 8, 2016, and the morning sun streamed through the windows of the KXAN News studio in Austin, Texas, as Patricia Williams prepared for another day of delivering the news to her beloved community. At 51, the veteran morning news anchor had become a fixture in Austin households for over 15 years, her warm personality and genuine care for local stories making her a trusted voice that thousands of viewers relied on to start their day. Patricia had built her career on covering community celebrations, local charity drives, and the human interest stories that connected neighbors across the sprawling Texas capital. That December morning, Patricia was excited to cover the holiday season's most heartwarming stories. The show's lineup included segments about local toy drives, holiday charity events, and year-end community celebrations that brought Austin residents together. Her co-anchors and production crew had worked with her for years, creating a family-like atmosphere in the newsroom where Patricia's infectious laughter and mentoring spirit made everyone feel valued and appreciated. But for several weeks, Patricia had been struggling with severe headaches that seemed to worsen with each passing day. The pain would strike suddenly during editorial meetings, forcing her to excuse herself to find a quiet place to recover. She attributed the symptoms to work stress and the demanding schedule of morning television, which required her to wake at 3:30 a.m. and maintain high energy levels throughout the broadcast. Patricia had always been dedicated to her craft, often working through minor illnesses and personal challenges to ensure her viewers received reliable news coverage. Her colleagues noticed she seemed more tired than usual, occasionally pausing mid-sentence during rehearsals or appearing momentarily confused when reviewing teleprompter scripts. Patricia dismissed their concerns with her characteristic smile, insisting she just needed more sleep and perhaps a vacation after the holiday season. The production team had no idea that their beloved anchor was experiencing the early warning signs of a catastrophic medical emergency that would unfold in front of thousands of viewers. During a live interview segment about local holiday charities, Patricia was speaking with a representative from the Austin Food Bank about their Christmas meal distribution program. The conversation was flowing naturally as Patricia asked thoughtful questions about volunteer opportunities and donation needs. Then, without warning, she suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence, her words trailing off as she stared blankly at the camera with a confused expression that immediately alarmed her co-anchor. Patricia appeared disoriented and lost, her usual professional composure replaced by obvious distress as she struggled to understand what was happening to her. She began speaking incoherently, her words slurred and disconnected as her co-anchor tried desperately to continue the interview and maintain some semblance of normalcy. The camera operators and production crew watched in horror as Patricia's condition rapidly deteriorated before their eyes. Then Patricia collapsed at the news desk during the live broadcast, her body going limp as she fell forward onto the papers and coffee mug that had been part of her morning routine for 15 years. Viewers across Austin watched in shock as paramedics arrived on set and began emergency treatment, their professional urgency contrasting sharply with the cheerful holiday decorations that still adorned the studio. The station eventually cut to commercial, but thousands had already witnessed the medical emergency unfold in real time. Patricia was rushed to the hospital where she was diagnosed with a massive stroke that had caused irreversible brain damage. Despite the medical team's best efforts, she died 3 days later, surrounded by family members who had flown in from across the country. The morning show went off the air for a week as the team grieved and processed the traumatic loss of their colleague and friend. Viewers flooded social media with tributes, sharing how Patricia had been part of their daily routines for years, her presence providing comfort and connection in an increasingly disconnected world. A journalism scholarship was established in her name at the University of Texas to support aspiring broadcast journalists who shared her passion for community storytelling. Thanks for watching. Just when you think you've heard the most heartbreaking live TV tragedies. It was August 7, 2018, when 22-year-old Haley Prescott made the decision that would end her life in the crumbling ruins of Detroit's abandoned Packard automotive plant. Haley had always been drawn to danger. Standing 5 feet 6 inches with an athletic build from rock climbing, she possessed a fearless spirit that made her parents lose sleep. After dropping out of Wayne State's communications program, she worked part-time at a vintage store in Corktown. But her real passion was urban exploration. Her YouTube channel, Urban Haley, had 5,000 subscribers who watched her navigate abandoned buildings across the Midwest. Her personality mixed thrill-seeking bravado with genuine curiosity about forgotten places. 3 weeks before that fateful night, she had slipped on wet concrete during exploration, telling her roommate it could have been worse. The close call should have been a warning, but for Haley, it only added excitement. The Packard plant represented the ultimate challenge. Recent arrests of other explorers made it notorious, which meant successfully streaming from there would generate significant views and donations from her primarily teenage male audience. She arrived at 11:47 p.m. in steady rain, wearing worn hiking boots. The 4.2 pounds of streaming equipment strapped to her chest affected her balance. Her live stream began with 1,247 viewers as she entered the structurally compromised building. The chat exploded with excitement and donations, encouraging increasingly dangerous stunts. For 23 minutes, she explored lower floors, her headlamp cutting through darkness as she narrated the building's automotive history. The rain had intensified, creating treacherous conditions above. At 12:15 a.m., she reached the 4th floor, where decades of neglect had created gaps in the flooring and exposed twisted rebar. Water dripped through roof holes, making every surface slick. Chat members, emboldened by anonymity, demanded she climb higher, backing requests with donations that pinged through her phone. At 12:31 a.m., Haley faced a 3-foot gap with a 40-foot drop to machinery below. Viewers had donated over $60 in 5 minutes, all requesting she make the jump. She backed up, took a running start, and leaped. Her worn boot treads, compromised by wet concrete, failed to find purchase on the landing. She desperately reached for rebar before gravity claimed her. The fall lasted 2.3 seconds. She landed on industrial machinery, a metal beam penetrating her abdomen and causing massive internal bleeding. Her chest-mounted camera shattered, but her phone continued streaming audio. For 3 agonizing minutes, viewers heard her labored breathing fade to silence. Multiple viewers called 911, but the audio-only stream made it nearly impossible for emergency services to locate her. Emergency responders arrived at 1:15 a.m., beginning systematic search. 20 minutes later, they found Haley's body. She was pronounced dead from traumatic injuries and massive internal bleeding. She was just 22. The aftermath rippled through communities. Detroit police increased patrols at exploration sites, though budget constraints prevented comprehensive security. Haley's parents attempted starting a safety campaign, but struggled with limited resources. The streaming platform added basic location warnings, but stopped short of requiring equipment verification. Her death became a case study about viewer responsibility and the ethics of encouraging dangerous behavior through donations. Haley Prescott's story serves as a stark reminder that pursuing digital fame can exact the ultimate price, and that anonymous voices encouraging risk bear no responsibility for consequences. It was June 22, 2019, when 25-year-old Morgan Ellsworth made the decision that would end his life in the most violent way imaginable. The Phoenix mechanic had built his Speed Demon AZ channel to 8,000 subscribers by filming illegal street races in his modified Dodge Challenger, a beast pumping out 850 horsepower through modifications he'd installed at his uncle's auto shop. Morgan's impulsive personality and desperate need for validation had nearly killed him 2 months earlier when he spun out at high speed, later joking to followers about his guardian angel working overtime. But that close call only fed his addiction to cheating death while thousands watched online. His competitive nature demanded more extreme content, more dangerous speeds, more heart-stopping moments that translated into donations and subscriber growth. The plan was simple yet insane. Celebrate hitting 10,000 subscribers by breaking 200 miles per hour on Interstate 10. Morgan had scouted a 15-mile stretch known for minimal late-night traffic and limited police presence. What he hadn't accounted for was construction work that would turn his highway into a death trap. At 2:17 a.m., Morgan went live after consuming 3 energy drinks and unprescribed Adderall, a cocktail that sharpened his focus while destroying his judgment. His 1,156 viewers flooded chat with encouragement and donations, each ping pushing him toward higher speeds. The stimulants made every sensation more intense while impairing his ability to process warning signs. After building anticipation from a gas station, Morgan entered the highway at 2:31 a.m., his dashboard camera capturing every moment as he accelerated through gears. At 2:44 a.m., he activated nitrous, and the Challenger launched forward like a rocket, reaching 167 miles per hour, while Morgan provided live commentary about engine temperatures and boost pressure. Construction barriers appeared at 2:47 a.m., with advance warning signs that Morgan's stimulant-addled brain failed to process. His tunnel vision, focused on the speedometer and chat messages, prevented him from recognizing the lane closure until too late. Traveling at 145 miles per hour, he attempted to brake and change lanes simultaneously, sending his rear wheels into catastrophic loss of traction. The Challenger spun violently before striking the concrete barrier at 89 miles per hour. The dashboard camera captured 2.1 seconds of initial impact before being destroyed, while Morgan's phone flew from its mount and the stream cut to black. The roof collapsed during the collision, causing massive head trauma that killed Morgan instantly. Within 30 seconds, the vehicle erupted in flames, turning his modified masterpiece into a twisted metal coffin. Emergency responders arrived at 2:54 a.m., but couldn't approach until the fire was extinguished. They found Morgan's body with fatal head injuries. The young mechanic's need for speed was finally satisfied permanently. Arizona increased fines for street racing following the incident, but didn't implement vehicle seizure laws that might have prevented similar tragedies. Morgan's family filed a lawsuit against the streaming platform, but it was dismissed under Section 230 protections. His uncle's auto shop faced investigation, but received only minor citations, as proving illegal modifications proved difficult after the crash destroyed evidence. No federal legislation emerged, though some platforms added speed-related content warnings after negative media coverage. The temporary media attention about dangerous streaming content faded quickly, and viewer behavior remained unchanged. Morgan Ellsworth had achieved his goal of internet fame, but at the ultimate cost. His final race ended not with celebration, but with a young man's life extinguished in flames on a Phoenix highway. Another cautionary tale lost in the endless scroll of online content. It was September 14, 2016, when the granite walls of Yosemite National Park claimed another life in the most preventable way imaginable. Autumn Chandler was 26 years old, a perfectionist by nature who channeled her obsessive attention to detail into two passions: freelance graphic design and extreme solo hiking. Her lean, muscular frame told the story of countless hours spent scaling California's most challenging peaks. What started as weekend adventures had evolved into something bigger. Her YouTube channel, Autumn Adventures, had attracted 12,000 subscribers who lived vicariously through her death-defying climbs. But Autumn carried a secret that gnawed at her confidence. 5 weeks earlier, a handhold had crumbled beneath her grip during a practice climb, sending her tumbling 15 feet onto unforgiving rock. The bruised ribs had healed, but the psychological scars ran deeper. She needed to prove to herself and her audience that she hadn't lost her edge. For 6 months, she had meticulously planned this climb, a 5.10D difficulty route on El Capitan that would push her technical skills to their limits. She obtained all proper permits and studied every inch of the granite face. The only questionable decision was her plan to livestream the entire ascent, despite park guidelines discouraging live broadcasting during technical climbs. At 5:47 a.m., Autumn began her approach with 23 pounds of essential climbing gear, plus an additional 2.1 pounds of streaming equipment. The extra weight seemed negligible, but every ounce mattered on a route this demanding. The stream went live at 6:23 a.m., with 847 viewers watching her methodical progress up the granite wall. For the first 180 feet, everything proceeded flawlessly. Autumn's technique was textbook perfect, each movement calculated and precise. At 7:41 a.m., she reached the technical section where holds became smaller and required absolute concentration. This was where climbers separated themselves from tourists. But instead of focusing entirely on the rock, Autumn found herself glancing at her phone screen, reading chat messages from experienced climbers offering real-time route advice. At 7:52 a.m., while processing a viewer's suggestion about hand placement, she committed her weight to what appeared to be a solid granite hold. The rock looked trustworthy, but appearances deceived. A hairline fracture from years of natural weathering had compromised its integrity. The hold exploded away from the wall. Autumn plummeted 25 feet before her safety rope caught her, but momentum swung her body into the granite face like a pendulum. Her helmet absorbed most of the impact but cracked from the force, leaving her with a severe concussion that clouded her judgment at the worst possible moment. Disoriented and struggling to think clearly, Autumn made the fatal decision to continue her descent rather than wait for rescue. Her concussed brain couldn't process the complex rope work required for safe rappelling. When she incorrectly clipped her rope at 8:17 a.m., physics took over. She fell an additional 40 feet onto a narrow ledge, her spine absorbing the full impact. The internal bleeding began immediately. Park rangers reached her location 3 hours later using specialized technical rescue equipment, but Autumn had died within minutes of hitting the ledge. The spinal cord injury and massive internal trauma were unsurvivable. The climbing community wrestled with the implications. Forums and magazines dissected every detail of the accident, leading some climbing groups to voluntarily adopt no streaming policies during difficult ascents. Yosemite added stronger warnings about filming during technical climbs, but stopped short of outright bans, citing enforcement difficulties. Autumn's family received a modest settlement from her equipment manufacturer for a minor harness defect, though investigators determined it played no role in her death. The real culprit was distraction, at a moment when complete focus meant the difference between life and death. Her death became a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers of performing for an audience when the stakes couldn't be higher. But like so many tragedies before it, the lessons learned faded as quickly as the headlines, and the granite walls of Yosemite continued their patient wait for the next climber who would confuse confidence with invincibility. It was January 8, 2018, when Riley Thatcher made her final live stream from the frozen shores of Emerald Bay at Lake Tahoe, California. Riley, a 24-year-old snowboard instructor with an insatiable appetite for danger, had built her Riley Honest channel around increasingly reckless winter stunts across the Sierra Nevada mountains. Her 8,000 subscribers craved the adrenaline-fueled content she delivered, and Riley fed off their validation like an addiction. Standing 5'6" with sun-bleached hair and calloused hands from years on the slopes, she possessed the kind of fearless confidence that made her both magnetic and reckless. The previous winter had served as a warning she chose to ignore. After falling through thin ice on a mountain lake, friends had pulled her from the frigid water while she laughed off hypothermia symptoms, joking that she was too cool to drown. That near-death experience should have been her wake-up call, but instead became another story to tell her growing audience. On this particular afternoon, an unusual 10-day cold snap had formed a deceptively thin ice sheet across a 50-foot section of Emerald Bay. Posted warnings about unstable conditions dotted the shoreline, but Riley saw only opportunity. Her 1,156 live viewers were already encouraging the dangerous crossing through donations and chat messages, many requesting she venture further onto the questionable ice for better content. At 2:14 p.m., with temperatures hovering at 22 degrees Fahrenheit, Riley began her walk across ice measuring only 1 to 2 inches thick in most areas, far below the minimum 4 inches needed for safe passage. Her heavy winter jacket and snow pants would soon become her enemy. But in that moment, she felt invincible. The first 17 minutes passed without incident, as Riley bantered with her audience, their donations and dares pushing her forward. At 2:31 p.m., approximately 30 feet from shore, ominous cracking sounds echoed beneath her boots. Chat members erupted with excitement, urging her onward despite the obvious danger. 3 minutes later, at 2:34 p.m., the inevitable happened. Riley stepped onto a section weakened by wave action underneath, and the ice gave way instantly. She plunged into 38 degrees Fahrenheit water that measured 12 feet deep at that location, her phone disappearing beneath the surface within 15 seconds, abruptly ending the stream. The shock of cold water triggered involuntary gasping as her heavy clothing became waterlogged anchors. Riley struggled desperately for approximately 2 minutes, but hypothermia worked with ruthless efficiency. Her movements became increasingly sluggish as her core temperature plummeted, and she eventually slipped beneath the surface, drowning in the dark waters of Lake Tahoe. Multiple viewers had called 911, but emergency responders arrived 18 minutes too late. Dangerous ice conditions and search difficulties prevented immediate recovery efforts, and Riley's body wasn't found until the following morning. The coroner's report confirmed death by drowning with hypothermia as a contributing factor, noting that the water temperature caused rapid loss of motor function. Lake Tahoe authorities responded by posting additional winter safety signs and increasing patrol frequency. Though budget constraints prevented major policy changes, Riley's devastated family attempted to channel their grief into a cold water safety awareness campaign. but lacked resources to establish a formal foundation. Their lawsuit against the streaming platform proved unsuccessful, leaving them with only memories and unanswered questions about social media's role in their daughter's death. The tragedy generated brief local media coverage about ICE safety and social media risks, but failed to create lasting change in streaming platform policies or user behavior. Riley's channel remains frozen in time, a digital monument to the deadly intersection of thrill-seeking and online validation, where the pursuit of content ultimately cost everything. It was May 4th, 2015, when 29-year-old Kendra Vaughn made the decision that would end her promising career as both a meteorology graduate student and rising storm-chasing content creator. The ambitious young woman from Norman, Oklahoma, had built her Storm Hunter KV YouTube channel to 7,000 dedicated subscribers who followed her increasingly daring pursuits across Tornado Alley. Kendra possessed an analytical mind, shaped by years of atmospheric science coursework, but her academic knowledge had bred dangerous overconfidence in her ability to predict storm behavior. Unlike veteran chasers who respected severe weather's unpredictable nature, she relied heavily on textbook theories, often dismissing experienced field researchers' hard-earned wisdom. Her personality combined scientific curiosity with adrenaline seeking that pushed boundaries others wouldn't cross. 2 months earlier, a severe hailstorm had battered her reinforced chase vehicle, leaving spiderweb cracks across the windshield and dents covering the hood. Rather than viewing this as a warning, Kendra dismissed the incident as an occupational hazard, already planning closer approaches for more dramatic footage. On that fateful Monday afternoon, meteorological conditions were aligning for a significant tornado outbreak near Moore, Oklahoma. Kendra had been tracking an EF3 tornado for over an hour, positioning herself at what she calculated to be a safe 1.2 miles from the storm's projected path. Her academic training told her this distance provided an adequate safety margin, but she failed to account for chaotic tornado movement patterns. At 4:23 p.m., she began her live stream from inside her vehicle, providing detailed meteorological commentary to 2,847 viewers while maintaining visual contact with the massive funnel cloud. Her audience was captivated by scientific explanations mixed with raw power unfolding before their screens. Donation notifications flooded her chat as viewers requested closer footage, offering money for increasingly dramatic shots. The tornado appeared to follow its predicted northeastern track, when suddenly, at 4:41 p.m., local wind patterns caused an unexpected directional shift. The massive vortex began moving directly toward Kendra's position, at speeds exceeding her vehicle's escape capability. Her meteorological training had prepared her for many scenarios, but not for split-second decision-making when theory met deadly reality. Panic set in as she attempted emergency relocation, but her escape route was blocked by debris and other storm chasers positioned along the same road. The tornado's outer circulation, with winds exceeding 120 miles per hour, reached her vehicle before she could find an alternate path. Her reinforced chase car, designed to withstand hail and moderate winds, was no match for the tornado's incredible force. The vehicle was lifted and rolled multiple times like a toy, tumbling through the air before being thrown approximately 80 feet into a concrete culvert. The impact crushed the roof completely, causing massive head trauma that rendered Kendra unconscious immediately. Her streaming equipment was destroyed in the first rollover, cutting the live feed thousands had been watching in horror. Emergency responders reached the crash site 35 minutes after the tornado passed, but Kendra had already succumbed to her injuries within minutes of impact. The traumatic brain injury caused by the vehicle's violent collision with the culvert proved instantly fatal. The National Weather Service later used Kendra's case to emphasize storm-chasing safety protocols, though no new regulations were implemented. Moore updated emergency response procedures, but practical concerns prevented restrictions on storm chaser access to dangerous areas. Her streaming platform added basic severe weather warnings to meteorological content, but technical complexity prevented automatic termination features during dangerous situations. The meteorological community discussed her death extensively, leading some to voluntarily adopt stricter safety distances, though no major behavioral changes occurred. Kendra Vaughn's final chase served as a sobering reminder that academic knowledge cannot replace respect for nature's unpredictable power. It was March 15, 2017, when Crystal Bowers made the decision that would end her life in the most horrific way imaginable. Crystal was a 28-year-old data entry clerk working nights in Riverside, California. At 5 feet 4 inches and 320 pounds, she lived alone in a studio apartment where her kitchen table doubled as her streaming setup. Her bubbly personality made her popular among 5,000 regular viewers, but beneath lay deep insecurities from years of workplace bullying about her weight. Food had become both Crystal's comfort and curse. She discovered mukbang streaming 2 years earlier, finding it provided income and social connection she craved. Her viewers became her world, encouraging increasingly dangerous eating challenges. 2 weeks prior, Crystal nearly choked on Korean fried chicken during a live stream. Her face turned red as she struggled, but viewers thought it was entertainment, flooding chat with laughing emojis. She coughed it up, but the incident should have been a warning. Instead, Crystal saw opportunity. She announced a celebration stream for reaching 6,000 followers, promising to devour 4 pounds of grilled samgyeopsal in under 25 minutes. For 2 days, she barely ate, wanting to maximize her appetite. On Tuesday evening, Crystal positioned herself at her kitchen table, a large bowl overflowing with thick-cut grilled pork belly strips dominating the frame. At 7:23 p.m., she went live to 1,847 viewers, her largest audience ever. The chat exploded with excitement. Viewers urged her to eat faster, and donations poured in, demanding speed. Crystal, desperate to please, abandoned her usual measured pace, grabbing larger pieces with chopsticks, barely chewing before swallowing. At 7:34 p.m., disaster struck. Crystal grabbed an exceptionally thick piece of samgyeopsal, approximately 4 inches long and 2 inches wide. After only 2 quick chews, she swallowed the warm, fatty meat. The large piece lodged completely in her trachea, the grease making it impossible to dislodge while blocking her airway entirely. The chat initially erupted with laughter, thinking this was comedy, but as Crystal's face turned from red to deep purple, some realized something was wrong. Crystal frantically attempted the Heimlich maneuver on herself, stumbling around her space, knocking over the bowl. The viewer count climbed to 2,200 as word spread. Some viewers called 911 while others continued making jokes, unable to comprehend the reality unfolding. At 7:36 p.m., Crystal collapsed face first onto her kitchen floor. Her body convulsed as her brain was starved of oxygen. The stream continued broadcasting until her phone battery died. Emergency responders arrived at 7:52 p.m., but Crystal had been dead for 12 minutes. The coroner confirmed death by asphyxiation, with the pork belly still lodged in her trachea. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Despite takedown efforts, Crystal's final stream spread across social media, becoming a viral cautionary tale. Her death exposed the dark reality of content creation, where creators push dangerous boundaries for viewer engagement. A grim reminder of how pursuing viral fame can have deadly consequences. If these tragic streams left you shaken, brace yourself for what's next. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.